And we're online. Hi everyone. With me today are Shawn from Full Moon Crafting Studios, who was already on our stream before. And joining us today is also Norm, who is new to the stream. So hi Shawn and Norm. And hi Charlene, and I see Stefano from Chimera Wargaming in the chat. Thanks for joining us. So guys,
Sure. Join.
today we're going to talk a bit about horror, Gothic horror, and how to get this running in a tabletop game. So how about we start by explaining what those genres are? Because sometimes I think I get them mixed up with science fiction sometimes, or what makes horror?
Well, horror, I mean, it, horror's broken down into different things, like subgenres of horror. Gothic horror is the base of all of it. And basically, what Gothic horror is the duality of man. If you look at the monsters that were created that came out of that, especially in film. Now, when you start getting into the legends, it's a little bit different. But it evolves from the legends of like the werewolf, the vampire, the Strigoi, for example, or
Hmm.
Nosferatu. It evolved to where during the Victorian era, when Bram Stoker came out with his book Dracula, it exploded. So that became
That
the
and Mary
space.
Shelley's um, Frankenstein.
Yeah, if you look, it when those books all came out, it changed how we perceive horror today because that was during the Victorian era when those books came out. So Gothic horror is normally associated with the Victorian era, but Gothic horror is really the duality of man. Like Mary Shelley's Frankenstein was a warning about messing with the creation of life. You know, I, from whatever deity people believe in, it shows that, well, we can do this now too. And is it right for us to do? It poses a moral question. And if you look at the society at the time, that was widely accepted. Um, with Bram Stoker's Dracula, it was there the whole biting on the neck thing because they didn't write about people. You couldn't go pick up of books like that where you know the vampire biting someone, the transferring of fluids, all that kind of stuff. It gets pretty in depth when you like actually look at like the whole psychology behind it. But in general, Gothic horror is the duality of man. At least that's how I view it. What about
Excuse me, I'm having some trouble with my camera, and I'm just restarting it right now.
you?
The detail of the but like you said back in the Gothic era, it was more of a political warning or something like that. Hey, we don't mess with this, or this might be the end result. The Dracula, I believe, was based off of the legend of Vlad the Impaler and all that stuff. That era is like a warning of this is the horror that can come from it. Incorporating into a game, you're creating a sense of the vivid reality of the that type of horror. You're bringing it into it, where you have some of the graphic details of the travesty going on, but at the same time you're trying to incorporate a message or incorporate the that era, the Victorian style era, what's going on.
Okay, so basically, with horror, you've always got these the big bad thing that someone is trying to warn you about, whether in like you said in Gothic horror, it's the duality of men. In cosmic horror, it's like the universe is terrible and it's out to get us, but it's always got that big warning thingy.
Yeah, if you actually look at all, like even you look at Lovecraft, you look at Dracula, you look at Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, you look at the Wolfman, um, and various other things, even to include like the Mummy and stuff like that. Werewolves and mummies, it's a curse. That's why they came back to well, for the Mummy, that's why it comes back to life. For the werewolf, it's the duality of man between being human and being a beast. And then you have the um, like cosmic horror. You have, there's that unspoken thing that lurks just outside in the darkness. So you walk outside in the dark, make sure you have a light, but that light's not going to illuminate everything. There's something but it goes back to how human beings were during our ascension into becoming what we are today. If you look, especially during the medieval periods, people didn't just go outside at night.
Oh yeah, for
I
sure.
mean,
Unless they absolutely, really, 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 really had to.
right. But see, like it was really weird because they would work in the morning and then sleep all afternoon and then work into the evening.
Yeah.
Um, Basically to avoid the heat of the day, they weren't out in the fields. They would come in and then they'd go out, once the sun started to, say like past like 3 o'clock in the afternoon, when the sun starts to set its descent into becoming night, you'll see that that's when they would go out. Well, what was the scariest thing for human beings? If you can't see, well, now so they had torches. Well, torchlight only gives you so far. You know what I mean? Like it gives that. This is based off of like actual like how things were, but in gameplay, like I don't like with my games, I don't really let people play Dragonborn and all these different wild, crazy things that they've come up with over the years. Human beings, you can set a sense just because they can't see in the dark. Because how many people have, as far as I understand it, pretty much all of us while we were children at some point were afraid of the dark because it's the unknown. So when you start looking into that, you see all these different factors that you can utilize within a game, and now it starts to evolve to become a true sense of what we would consider Gothic horror.
I got
You know,
a couple of ideas about that. First of all, with regards to the fear of the dark, humans are extremely visual creatures, so we do nearly everything by sight. So if you remove that
hmm
from someone who is used to having it, then you've literally erased most of our points of reference.
yes,
So yeah, that would be definitely be terrifying. And second,
yeah,
with regards to what you mentioned about stuff like Dragonborn and Drow and elves and so on, being practically superhuman is not conductive to being frightened. I think Dan Masters, Professor Dungeon Master, over it a few times, I think, where he says that even when you look at older editions of Dungeons and Dragons versus the modern editions, you go
yeah,
from a terrified adventurer who is like, will I survive the next adventure, to practically a superhero.
yeah. Um, it's one thing. I mean, I will say Professor Dungeon Masters and Dan Masters is one of the guys that when I first started getting back into this, because Norm and I've been playing D&D for years. I mean, at least 10 years. So, we had our phases where we play a lot and then we'd slump off, and then we play a lot and then slump off, because I was DMing at a store, a gaming store, and it had gotten so bad that all the other DMs left because everybody wanted to be in my game because I used lighting, I used sound, music, all that kind of stuff.
The whole immersive
You know,
thing. Yeah.
Well, yeah, we'll turn off the lights in the room and, just have little ambient lighting just enough that people can read their character sheets and all that kind of stuff, and they would listen to the story. Now, storytelling as a DM is not what we're. I kind of look at we're facilitating. Here's the world environment, and here's your monsters that you're killing. We're looking at being like that. Now, um, with a lot of different things, when you set the mood and tone, it literally makes it so that their stress goes away. They focus in on what's going on because, well, I'm in this atmosphere now. But see, by doing that, by just turning the lights off and having just a little bit of light, the like little LED lights, the little, so that everyone could read their character sheet and stuff. When you do something like that, it sets a tone because, yeah, they may be in their house or their friend's house or wherever, but it sets this tone that there's something in the darkness because it feeds into our primal fear of what's in the darkness.
Yeah, you're also making me think of the kind of atmosphere where you're listening to a story around the campfire.
Yes. Actually playing D&D with a bonfire going is really creepy in the woods.
What you try to do is you try to involve as much of our primary senses as you can, and that way you immerse your players into the game. And once they get immersed in the game, that's where their focus is. That's where their attention is. And then after they're comfortable because they're immersed in it, that's when you can pick it up and involve and get the horror start to involve to get their blood pumping, and then they become more of a part of the game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think
And the storytelling can come out because you've got their full attention, and then you can really amp things up and get the horror going and get the I can't get away from noisy dogs. And when you get them that immersed into it, they want to come back for more and more and more. And then next thing you know, you got this huge campaign.
Yeah.
You got like I said, you got 20 people wanting to play, and you only have X number of seats, and you can only handle so much before everything slows down.
Well, I mean, that's what happened at the gaming store with me, was that we went from having maybe 5 people to, I think it got up to 42 people that would come and go.
Yeah, it's
And
insane.
yeah, I burnt out so fast because of it. One of the big things with the running a horror campaign or grim dark campaign, all that kind of stuff, I would definitely check out Dungeon Craft. Dan Masters has got the best stuff on just how to make up quick rules or utilizing different things to help younger DMs that don't know, very much, or they're trying to change it up so they're not playing that superhero fantasy. If you want to play Marvel Heroes, play Marvel Heroes. If you want to play
yeah,
DC
exactly.
Heroes, play DC Heroes. But that's what 5th edition has evolved into. I know a lot of people like it. It's great. I mean, I've played 5th edition. I've DM'd 5th edition, except I always pull my own elements of things into it, and it's not true 5th edition as written in the book, because inevitably when you're playing a role-playing game, you've got the structure of the rules, but within that structure of rules, the DM creates the world. So you can take and create a world where these certain things may not apply, or these things apply, and it's just a variant of different rules from all over. It's just, some of this stuff is kind of hard to explain because it's something like, Norm and I both went to college. Norm has his master's degree in IO psychology, and I have my I'm 1 credit short of my PhD, because when we submitted our thesis, they rejected it after it was done twice.
Ouch. But
Yeah, and it wasn't a bad thing. It was just because of the topic of how we addressed the topic and shown different things. Well, you can utilize psychology when you play, like, if you want a true Gothic horror setting, you set the stage
I
with the
mean,
environment
but
for him.
that's true of any emotion you want to create, yeah?
Yes. So if you get people that are, because people come to play role playing games, how many people are coming after they've gotten off work, they've gone home, if they have a family, they've dealt with their family, they've eaten dinner, everybody's getting together, or you know, you'll have incidents where people get together, ordered a bunch of pizza, the kids are off playing, in the living room, and everybody's in the dining room sitting down to play, where, you have that type of structure. Or you just have a group of friends all getting together. Well, if you're the one that's hosting, you set the environment. You turn down the lights. You have little light sources like the LED candles. I mean, some people use real candles, um, but it sets a mood. And once you have that mood set, where you can play a creepy musical, um, using creepy music, but you don't turn it up really loud. You turn it up just so that people can barely hear it.
Just so that it's
Because
at the edge of your consciousness rather than taking distracting from your storytelling.
right.
Ah, okay.
But the thing about it is that if you go through and you find the music you're going to use, so then you learn how to um, utilize your voice with the tempo of the music. So if you get into a dramatic point in the music, your speech becomes a little dramatic and then flows down with it and it follows it.
I mean,
So it creates a sense of fear. And but what you're trying to do is to get the endorphins to release because everybody's fine at the end of it. It's like going to a scary movie, like one that's actually really scary.
I
Where
kind of think of it as an analogy, like you're creating a live action video game
yeah,
where in a video game you've got all the imagery there in front of you, and then you've got the noise, the music in the background, and you got the noise of the creatures you're battling or whatever, and you're trying to create that, but on a tabletop setting. So you have to mess with the lighting, the ambient music, um, and then you have to use in your words to create that imagery in somebody's mind of what the scene looks like. And that's where the tabletop, the crafting comes in, because you can actually put a visual reference point for people to say, okay, that's kind of what it looks like, and then their mind goes wild.
okay.
And it brings out all the, like you said, it releases the endorphins, it kicks the adrenaline up, and people start to feel that fear. The fear is not real, but they feel that fear, and it draws them in.
It's like you said, it's like pretty much a horror movie. Just you're
Yeah, a horror movie or a like playing like Resident Evil video game or something.
hmm
yeah,
Yep.
You're immersed with all those zombies coming at you, and the music's in the background, and that's why a lot of people do especially the younger kids. You can draw them in if you use those sort of references, but you're using your words, not to set the scene, and your tabletop. Um, I'm lost for words here. But the miniatures and everything to create that scene in their mind.
I get you. Actually, from what you're saying, it's again, what you're saying isn't just applicable to horror, but to quite a lot of things. But what I'm getting is that apart from psychology, it's almost verging into theater studies almost.
yeah. I mean, essentially, when you read a book, what do people do? They imagine what's going on. The
hmm
characters take on whatever look they're going to have from the description that people were given. So it's the same thing. Basically, what we're doing when we're playing role playing games and stuff is that you have where you have your narrator. Here's the story, or here's the environment of the story. and then the player characters develop the story as they go. And you, as the referee, game master, dungeon master, whatever, you literally are the one that's like, okay, well, I've given you everything that's on the stage. You guys have used your imaginations, etc., and you've developed to this point of this is what we're going to do now. Well, here's the ramifications for what you've done, both positive and negative.
Gotcha.
You
The
know,
players become the actors.
yeah, the players become the actors in the story, so it's funny to watch, but I will say this: I'm not a big fan of Critical Role, but when they came out with their cartoon series that was on
Uh,
Amazon,
yeah, Amazon.
well, that's what it kind of gives that same idea of that's what um this is what they were seeing
Hmm.
in their
Yeah.
mind's eye. You know what I mean? Like my version of Bram Stoker's Dracula, the way I see it in my mind, is different than someone else's.
No,
Now, it may have similarities because of popular culture and context, but it's still different. Like
I mean,
to me,
in my head, Dracula is always going to be Gary Oldman.
yeah, Dracula can be using Dracula as a reference point. Dracula could be a very creepy thing, especially if you've read about Strigoi, um, and Nosferatu and the different legends that came out of Europe about vampires, to include Roman and Greek myths that are the same thing. They just call it something different.
Yeah,
Um,
actually, circling back to that for a second, because you mentioned werewolves and the Middle Ages earlier, separately, but if you look at earlier tales from the Middle Ages about werewolves, it's more like a cautionary tale, like do not act like a beast, don't sin or whatever, or you will become like a beast. And I think I'm seeing the distinction now after that, after you explained it, between horror and just having a monster in the story.
Kind of like Grimm fairy tales. It started out as it was a warning for the kids: don't go out at night,
Mm-hmm.
don't do this stupid stuff, and because horrible things will happen to you. You look at the original Grimm fairy tale; it's not what it turned into. Not modern day, but
Yeah, of
the
course.
I mean, and it was all just a warning: don't go out at night, don't do this, don't venture from the village, because there are evil things out there that will get to you.
Oh yeah,
And
for sure.
they had to do this imaginary thing to get, because kids live in an imaginary mind. Well, if you look at in a lot of this in the Gothic horror and whatever genre you want to do, if you're the referee, DM, whatever you want to call it, you have to do research into that. You have to understand what the history was behind it and how it transpired, in order to incorporate that in your game and to make it realistic.
Oh yeah, for sure.
So, if you don't know the full history of Nosferatu and you're trying to do a campaign on that, or the game systems I used to do, the Twilight 2000, the military thing, if you didn't have a background in that, you didn't know about it, you didn't research it. If you had anybody who had any sort of knowledge in your game, going, "What the hell are you doing?"
Yeah, I think
And
I see that a lot in movies, especially on TV shows.
oh yeah,
It's like yeah, it's more or less stuff like this, but no, it's not anything like that.
it, exactly. You bring that realism in there, and that's how you draw players.
yeah, now we're getting into the whole like bringing a little bit of realism to it to make it more real. Now, Norm, I know you lived through it, and I lived through it. The whole Satanic Panic. Um,
Oh,
the
Sean,
'80s horror.
Sean, could I interrupt you for
Yeah,
a second before we go into that?
yeah,
Because that's definitely a
yeah.
topic I would like to hear more about. But I'm just going to drop the link to the community showcase in the chat in case anyone wants
Okay.
to join in on that. And in the meantime, hi to Lisa, Earthman Brick, and Mia. Nice to see you guys. So yeah, the Satanic Panic,
Okay.
the
So
big one of
the
the
Satanic.
80s, yeah?
Oh yeah. we've all got our own stories about it. My parents played Dungeons and Dragons in the 70s. So when I was younger in the 80s, I didn't experience it. Now, I did have a grandmother told me that it was an evil thing to do. Norm's story is a little bit different when it comes to that. Go ahead, Norm.
Yeah, my dad was kind of a religious zealot, and when the whole satanic panic came through, he took all my D&D books to the fireplace and burned
Oh
them,
no!
all of them. And back then they weren't cheap, especially you're a teenager going to high school and working a full-time job and trying to take your girlfriend out on dates on weekends in between the game sessions.
Man,
It was expensive. That was to rebuild all that. Plus, all your characters are gone and your campaign's gone. And back then, you didn't have a whole lot of money. I was a high schooler, so we were making our own campaigns. We had a few of the modules, but we were making our own stuff up as we went along. It was kind of like a freestyle thing. So all those notes and everything were just burned.
yeah, it's not even with all the money in the world, it's not something you can buy back because that was the one copy of it.
Yeah, exactly,
Man,
exactly.
Yeah.
And
So
then and a side note to that, just recently, I got my sisters into D&D when they're younger. They're younger than me. But my mom, my dad's passed away. Well, my mom was over there last Christmas, and they actually had a D&D session where she played. And she called me up in the middle of it. Guess what I'm doing? But she was a little bit more free thinking than he was in that regard. So
yeah, I mean,
but the funny thing about it is, is that people like associate it with it. You know, I've had issues where I've had people that had um actual true psychological problems, and I had to ask them politely to leave my game.
hmm?
Um, because it started to evolve where they thought that they were really being chased. Now, mind you, this individual had um, some issues that they were dealing with on their own, and I was not informed. Um, because I'm very upfront and honest. I explained to everybody like this is how our game's going to go, and if you have any qualms with it, let's talk about it so we can, tone it down into certain places. We can tweak it so that nobody's uncomfortable. Um, I've always done that. I've been doing that
you have
for,
to throw that disclaimer out there.
yeah. Especially if you're going to run a really true, what your depiction of scary is.
Yeah, and I guess if you're running in a store or an open game, it's different than you got five, six people that you know very well and you know what buttons to push and what buttons not to push. But yeah, if it's an all-comers game.
Yes, exactly. But now it's just really funny when you look at all this different stuff. Like, we have like really good references to really bad people. Like I've been talking with you, Karl, about Giles, or I can't remember how to pronounce the guy's name.
Gil.
Gil, yeah.
Think
Uh,
Gil's on a fish.
yes. Um, he was one of Joan of Arc's like lieutenants, and then is later convicted of heresy, worshiping Satan, and he supposedly killed 150 kids. A character like that from real history, you can take and be like, okay, I can tweak it here. I can leave out the whole, worshiping Satan unless that's like part of like what your group has agreed to, and just leave that out to where it becomes whatever they, dabbled in dark magic, you know, but where you can take that and utilize a character from history. And when you do that, now you've got, all this information about the individual, but now you can set like, okay, this, like, I like these certain things that this person did, but now this person, oh, they're not a real high up noble, but they're still a noble. So now when player characters interact with that person, once they, they find out that, oh, he's the one that's killing everybody, all these kids or people or whatever, they can't touch him
Yep.
unless their character is a noble, and they better be a higher statue of noble, because their head will go on the chopping block before that guy does. Like, you can create that type of environment where that's truly terrifying, because, well, with fifth edition, oh, I'm a superhero, I'm just going to go use my charisma and I'm going to go talk to the king. In my game, or the game that Norm and I are developing and we've been playing, you can't do that. There's no way for a peasant to go sit in front of the king unless the king, wants them there, because they're going to get beheaded. So, like, well, I have a really high
Class,
charisma.
you're a merchant, and he's summoning you because he wants some of your wares, but he's not going to really summon you. He's going to have his assistant, or he's going to have the archduke or whoever come over and talk to you.
Yeah, of course.
You know, you you have to look into some of the history. This is where the history comes in, and everything. Nobody went and talked to the king. If you're talking to the king, then you're a noble, or you're a high-level merchant that he's directly dealing with for his housewares or something.
Yeah, pretty much. If you wanted to talk to him, you would have to ask someone who's higher up than you to ask someone who's higher up than them to get up the chain and get a word in.
Yeah, pretty much.
Intermediary to get to talk to him, and then you're just talking to this duke or whatever, and he's looking at you going, "I'm not going to tell the king that." You got a beef with him, you might as well just leave.
But all of this goes back into, I feel that the way D&D was, mind you, it's in conception, it came from a game that was a war game, a tabletop war game, to the role-playing aspect of it, but it still had that tabletop, war game feel to it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the whole thing that going back to what we were talking about before with, like, the whole satanic panic in the 80s, was what we're talking about right now, of, like, okay, you can make this scary, you can do this, you can use real elements, you could play the priest that is exorcising a demon from the Exorcist movie if you chose to, or whatever, a book that you've read that has had something like that into it. Now, when you look at that, people were afraid, like, oh, they went overboard with it, instead of looking at it like, oh, these people are playing out a movie or a book, instead of doing something nefarious.
Yeah, and I'll be honest, the whole satanic panic thing is pretty terrifying in itself, because of the, when something ends in book burnings, it's like, yeah, that's a really bad thing. And we're talking about the 1980s. We're not talking about the 40s or the I don't know, 30s or the 1500s. It's still very fresh. Oh, so still happens, yeah.
Yeah, well, that's the thing, is that people can play a game, however they want. That's great. People will play it and do weird things, but just, remember that you run a campaign of what you're comfortable with. I mean, not everybody's going to have where your group sets off on the adventure, and because of one player's backstory, they're a werewolf, and the party's hunting the werewolf, so they're doing all these things, and then they come to find out that it was one of their friends. Or you could change it to where it's an external person, where it gives a different feel to the story, but you just want to make sure that everybody's comfortable. with where you're going, because you don't want people to get overly zealous and think like, oh, this person's weird because of this. No. Um, it's all about perception. And that's like that is why during the 80s, because of some kid that went down into some tunnels underneath the university because he was losing it. Hold on.
Okay, Shawn, could you move the microphone a bit
There.
closer, please?
How's that?
Oh, loud and clear.
Okay. I had my gain turned down too low. Needless to say, instead of going off on the whole diatribe about it, just make sure that what you're doing is comfortable for you and others. It just you have to get past the stereotyping. Like everyone's like, oh, super, only people that play Dungeons and Dragons or role playing games are like, nerdy, geeky people. Well, not everybody was. I mean, in the 80s, early 90s, when you played, it nobody knew you played. You had a certain group of friends and that you'd do that with, but then you'd be out, at the pep rally with everybody at the football game, or, playing in the football game or whatever. It was like, okay, we're going to meet Saturday night and we're having a party, right? Okay, cool. So your perception was, oh, I'm going to a party and with all these other people. Now, some of them, like the people I played with, some of them were in college. So yeah, it was like going to a party because everybody was, having fun, but we were playing D&D.
Yeah, that's a typical mistake of assuming that a person is defined by only they only do one thing. It's
Yeah. So it gives that same perception. Was the whole satanic panic maybe blown overboard? Yeah.
oh yeah.
I mean, when do we not see things get blown overboard? But inevitably, you just want to have fun with the game. And when you play elements of like true Gothic horror, where, your party is playing an idea of they're like Van Helsing and all his people that went after Dracula. Some of them died, some of them lived, or all of them died. And it now becomes a cautionary tale that you don't go mess with vampires. With what Norm and I have been working on, with Reflections of Shadow, we're taking all of those elements as well as all the different rules from different game systems and looking at everything and like, okay, well, here's this chart that does this. Okay, that I like this chart and I like what it does. Well, we take that and fit that chart to our game.
Okay.
Where we're not reinventing the wheel, we're just making a better tire.
Okay, so I'm not sure how at what point you're in with the rating and how much you can give away, but could you give a brief overview of does it have its own setting or is it something you can drop and play in other settings? What can you tell us about it?
Okay, so it's a Gothic horror setting. It'd be take our world, our history, everything that we know about it, and now instead of it being our Earth, it's Earth 2. And it's like where the vampires and werewolves and ghosts and demons and all that stuff are there. So you can utilize real history and you can tweak certain little things and now you can make it scary. Pretty much that's what we're kind of going with it. But we're also looking at, okay, if you want to play like a fantasy world of you're in the Middle Ages, then you do that. If you want to play that you're, somebody in the 1970s, investigating a haunted house with what is the Warrens? You can do that. If you want to play futuristic sci-fi where you're in outer space, you can do that. But it's just as simple as you can do all these different things with one set of rules.
So you're basically starting off from a baseline of real world and then adding on the layers of what's in there. Yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
So you can play a prehistoric campaign where you're, you know, the first human beings that are, having to tromps through the jungle, and there's, saber-toothed tigers or whatever, smilodons, where you could like utilize like all the stuff that we know about stuff like that, where you can run a really cool campaign. But when you get to the being involved with what Gothic horror is, I mean, I hate to say it, you have to pick up books and read. I mean, for you to have an understanding of like, well, okay, Strugoi, Greek, that's the vampire, but their vampires were not like modern day vampires. Then you get to where, the German culture with the Nosferatu, they were not like modern vampires. And Nosferatu also was very similar to what was coming out of Eastern Europe, out of Romania or Wallachia, or, which is part of Romania, but all that was broke down into sub states at that time, with Vlad the Impaler and stuff like that. But when you start researching into medieval warfare, what Vlad the Impaler did, he held back literally a whole army with a small group of people.
Oh yeah.
Well, when you look at all the different periods and battles that occurred during the Middle Ages, it was pretty much the same thing. So now you're utilizing real history, but then it takes the game back to its original mechanics of being a medieval warfare game.
Yeah.
So a lot of people don't realize that, which is like really cool.
I know I know you're pretty big on that research thing, because you had mentioned it a few times about researching, for example, how I think 17th century colonial troops would operate.
Yes.
Yeah.
I during a beta testing with our game, where I have played where the players were playing spies in the colonial army. Well, they were playing spies during the American Revolution, where they were the spies for Washington. But the thing about it was, because when the word's eluding me. When the British, according to our history, started to lose the war, they unleash, they brought people over from Europe, that were druids and this and that, like they were actually of what we understand that culture to be, and unleashed what magic onto the battlefield, but not in the context of like they're throwing fireballs. No, they're using rituals to summon things to turn the tide of the war. So now this group of spies has got this information, and now they have to make it, up to New York from North Carolina. And that's where the adventure begins.
Yeah, again, it sounds out like finding the not the gaps in the historical record, because the whole thing is very well documented, but like you can read about, okay, this thing happened, we don't know exactly the events leading up to that, or the causes. So then, yeah, that's a good place to fit in zombies and what have you, zombies and vampires and stuff.
Well, when you look at that, if you don't know the legends of the vampire, well, how are you able to develop and utilize it in your own mind?
Yeah.
Now there's all different legends about them. Most of them, they're more like a ghoul, like what we would know as a ghoul.
Pretty much, yeah.
But with popular culture, with Bram Stoker's Dracula, it changed. You know, Dracula went from being an old, nasty, creepy, ghoul-looking thing to looking like a man. You know, where where you can take something like that and utilize it. That's scary because it puts you on a psychological thrill ride. But now you get to a point where, you know, you're fighting a person, but you notice little things like their collarbone's broken, so their arm's slumped down. Their eye is hanging out of its socket, but they're still moving. Well, in combat back in, you know, if you look at during like the Greek and Roman era, people would lose an eye and they keep fighting.
Oh yeah.
You know.
I mean,
Well,
any time up to and including when you're still using stuff like sabers and lances, that's going to happen.
Yes. Well, those people would keep fighting because they were in the mud and the muck and, you know, in the infantry on the ground. Well, for context of using it in fantasy role playing, well, that's a common thing to see, but something's just not right. There's no facial expressions. There's no, it's almost as if their humanity was stripped away, is the description that you would give, where that is a zombie. But you could go as far as cannibalistic.
Okay.
And they have a certain smell to them, and you describe the smell. You go into detail. That like I said, you bring out the senses, and you bring that into it. You know, you smell the stench of death, but this creature's walking at you, and it's expressionless. It's not really speaking. It's making weird noises. And okay, now you involve sight because you've described the eyeball hanging out and all that other stuff. The smell, you involve the smell. Now they're imagining the smell, and then the sounds it's making. You know, you got three senses right there that are all tied together.
Okay.
And once you do that, it brings out the realism, and then the people start really getting into it. Your players will just, oh crap! Well, what is this thing? You know.
Speaking of, what's your preferred approach to describing things? Because I know some people like to go into very verbose descriptions, and other people, I think Shawn, you had mentioned this. You prefer to give the general overview and let their own heads fill in the blanks. What's your take on that, Norm?
Your players. You have to understand what the experience and level of your players. If they play with you for a while, you don't have to get that graphic with them because they'll automatically go into it. You've trained them to automatically go into it. You have a new campaign. If you have a new campaign and a bunch of new players, you have to start going into a lot of detail. So you have to train them in and going, okay, well, if he starts describing this and he gives a brief overview of whatever this creature is or whatever, they automatically fill in the blanks. You know, you've got to, but your initial players, you have to read them and go, okay, well, they don't really understand where I'm going with this, so let me give them an idea. And like I said, you start bringing in all the senses, and then after a while, you don't have to do that, and it'll speed the gameplay up because they're automatically going to go, well, this thing's going to smell weird, or you know, unless you specifically say, you know, you know, you don't notice anything about this creature except for this, then they're automatically going to know, okay, well, it doesn't smell weird, it just looks weird, or you know, it's walking funny, or something, and then they're going to be even more cautious because like, okay, he's trying to trick me.
Yeah, I think
he wants me to get close to this thing so it grabs me. You know, and so you basically got to train your players in a way to be able to automatically go into that graphic sense.
Yeah, I think I turned.
Like if you start reading a book, the author doesn't know you, so they go into detail. Then they lessen the detail out later on, unless they're a really horrible writer, and they just want to bog you down with the details. But you know, once all the initial details are done, after that, you set the stage. You don't have to go in as much detail. You've got the stage set. They already know, okay, well, it's going to be like this. And their mind automatically goes into, oh, well, if it's nasty smelling and it's walking funny, that might be a zombie. I don't think I want to get close to that thing.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is a bit similar to, for example, if you look at Howard's writing style on Conan the Barbarian, where it's like, I don't know if he intentionally wrote like that or if it was just a habit of his, but if you look at the Conan stories, it's like he repeats out of details again because that was serialized, so he wouldn't know if you'd read any of his previous stuff. Whereas where he's going on to his longer work, he's much more concise with the descriptions.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, well, one of the big things about it though is like it's taking us so like Norm and I have been tossing around this idea for what at least 6 years. Well, since was it 2014 when we started playing again in Frontline Games in Clarksville, Tennessee. Um, that's when Norm and I started really tossing around like, well, what rules do we like? What rules do we don't like? And all we had was the starter kit for 5th edition.
Okay.
Because that's what because that was all that was out at the time. That and what you could download off of on the internet. That was right before the Player's Handbook even came out for 5th edition, and it was like, oh look, okay, it's a new D&D. Okay, hey, this is this is similar to 3.5. Okay, oh, it's got some elements from 2nd edition. It's got some elements from 1st edition. And it was pretty straightforward, but then it kind of evolved into superheroes.
Okay.
But looking at all these different game mechanics, I want people to be able to play if they want to play like a Call of Cthulhu style game. Where they're a detective and your 1930s detectives and actresses and whatever, and they're thrown into the haunted house. Well, you can give that style game without having to adapt any of the rules. They're there
Speaking of
because it's that basic.
speaking of, I mean, is that a big part of making a game more, let's call it scary? I mean, if you look at, for example, Call of Cthulhu or Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay,
Mm-hmm.
you're not playing a big hero or a massive wizard. You're like a librarian, a red catcher, an actress, like you mentioned. You know, random guys off the street, random people off the street.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, that's where the character development comes into play. Like, you don't want to have it. I don't like the long, drawn out 8-page backstory, but having certain bullet points of, this is who my parents were, or this is how my parents and or how I was raised. This is how many siblings I had. Now, if you do it to where both my parents died of the plague, and only 2 of the 5 siblings I had survived. One of them is horribly scarred, and etc. Now you've given your DM or game master, whatever you want to call it, the storyteller. You've given them enough fuel that, oh, okay, so we're going to do this. Here's the module we're playing, or a representation of that module. But now I've got all this other stuff where I can make one of the big bads in the game to represent, well, whatever this person has done, where, they were supposed to marry this person, or they were supposed to do this, or they were supposed to do that, or, what have you, where you set up a storyline arc that runs right along with the main story, where that's the reason why their character is doing this. It's not like, oh, well, you guys all just get together at the tavern and we set off on the adventure. No. How did they end up there? Well, that's where the little bit of a backstory comes into play, where they've all ended up at the same place at the same time. Or, three of them are friends and they grew up together, and, these people are over here and they're mutual acquaintances because they're from the same village, but their whole village got destroyed and raided. Picture like the beginning of Conan,
Okay.
with the movies where, people just come out of nowhere and wipe out the whole entire tribe. But these 5 kids survived. And now, because they're survivors and they have nothing, well, they're going to adventure. They're going to try to make their glory and get something out of it. But they all come from different backgrounds. One, worked in the wheat fields. One worked with the blacksmith. One worked with, it's funny, the shoemaker, or, they were a seamstress or whatever. Now you have that, and where with the mechanics of the game we're developing, you have to take care of your equipment. You don't take care of your armor, your sword can break. We already have a table designed to where if player characters aren't talking about, like you play your session, well, from now to the next session, what are you going to do? Like at last, while everybody's wrapping up and everything, well, I'm going to do this, I'm going to clean my sword, I'm going to maintain my equipment, blah, 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 blah. Well, now they've lessened their chance of having a sword break, because what's the worst thing in the world? Having a long sword that is not sharp, it is blunt, and you haven't maintained it, so it's got rust on it, and or it's got microfractures in the steel.
Yep.
And now it snaps. So now you go from having a long sword to a big dagger that has a blunt end.
It's
Having
interesting.
a basic mechanic for that to be able to be utilized. You don't have to use it, but it's there to utilize. It gives a little bit more sense of gameplay. Norm and I were talking earlier about what to do about armor, and I liked what Norm came up with.
I was like I say, you're battling this creature or whatever, and you've got your armor on, your chainmail or whatever. Well, and if you look at the history and how it was built and everything like that, they would have straps holding it all together, or the chainmail had the rings holding it together. But you take a blow with it, and the enemy scored a critical hit or whatever, or it's just luck of the draw or something, and the strap breaks on your armor.
Okay.
And you got a big ding in your armor,
yeah.
and now you're having to fight. You're still having to fight, but your armor's broken because you didn't maintain it or whatever, or a couple links broke on that chainmail and it's kind of flopping against you, and you're trying to swing your sword, or you're trying to draw your bow or whatever, and this thing's getting in the way. Well, now you have negatives to everything because you didn't maintain your stuff.
Right.
And
like Norm and I were discussing, here's the basic stuff. Here's some more advanced rules that you can utilize. And what Norm is describing is more of an advanced rule that you could utilize if that's what your players are into. But it could be as simple as DM description of, well, we have, person didn't maintain their stuff, so they got hit in their breastplate with a warhammer, so it dented it. Well, now the longsword that in the next fight they came into has gone through where that steel had been folded and weakened, or iron or whatever it may be.
Yeah. So
or one of the leather straps breaks. Well, imagine if Karl, you're into medieval weapons. You know this. Picture you're doing your thing and you got your breastplate on, and all of a sudden the strap breaks and now it's hanging halfway off you and you're trying to use your sword. You can
that's not going to happen. Because I mean,
Right.
once the armor gets so for example, if you're looking at plate armor, for example, the way that's held the way that works is that as soon as a part goes out of alignment or whatever, then you're stuck basically, because it relies on it being integral to distribute the weight and stuff.
Yes.
You're not going to fight in it. You can move in it, but you're not going to fight in that.
Well, now we're developing mechanics where, okay, here's the mechanics side of it for those players that want the math, the mechanics to be there on paper. But there's also the theatrical side to it for the DM of telling, well, your armor broke and your breastplate shifted, so now you're having a hard time swinging with, to your left or to your right or whatever. Now the DM can just use theatrical,
Yeah.
but they also have this other part to it that they can add to it of like, okay, so when they roll, you get a -1 to your attack roll, or a -2, depending on how badly damaged it is. You have that option, or just leave it to theatrical, and that's what we're trying to provide, is
Nice.
where they have that detail if they want it,
It makes me
or they
think.
could be like, hey, I like this one, but I don't like this one, so I'm going to use this one,
So you can
and
mix
then they
and
go
match
into the
them
full
and
theatrical.
so on. Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes me think of kind of a survival mode, which you just have that kind of thing where you have to worry about your equipment and make sure you have enough food and water and stuff. You could even run a horror game with just that without adding any monsters in.
Yeah, with the environment.
Yeah.
Picture your early explorer in the Americas. You have your equipment, your gear, and winter hits.
Yeah, I mean, take the Donner Party, for example. It's like,
Yeah,
I think you mentioned it a few times.
exactly. Yes, you could literally play the Donner Party where the monster is the Wendigo, but it could be one of the party members, because of becoming a cannibal, become the Wendigo, or it's an external monster. But it, what's what it evolves into being a little into the Gothic horror side of it is people freezing to death. I mean, even still today in 2022 in the winter, people still freeze to death in their homes. It's a sad fact of reality, but that has occurred how many times throughout history? So if you use that underlying thing of, you're in a blizzard and you've been in an environment and you've been exposed for 5 hours, well, what has that done to the human body? So now your player characters are experiencing that fatigue, that where they're starting to go hypothermic, but you're using the stages of hypothermia. All actual
You can't move them,
Dungeons.
and yeah.
I will say this one thing that Dungeons and Dragons did to me, because I was exposed to it so young, and well, it got me reading about history. It got me reading about, well, why do people do these things? It got me reading about, well, how do you do, how would you survive in a blizzard? What would it take to do that? Well, now you're expanding your knowledge, not just, well, we're playing this game and I'm just going to use these charts. Because if you have that knowledge, you can, if the player characters don't go exactly the way you want them to, and they want to do the kind of start pushing off and doing their own thing, you can adapt that quickly to, this is what's going on.
The whole premise sounds to me like some kind of elaborate trap to get more people to read history, which I think is a brilliant idea.
It's not an elaborate trap. It's in context. It's about, if you read something, even if it's on a Facebook blurb or whatever, how they've got things like, oh, this is how, look at this money that came out of this bog in England. And you look at it and you're like, wow, that looks really cool. But how many of us have sat and watched TV shows or programs that were just associated with, the history of vampires, the history of werewolves, just because it was on and it's like, oh, that's something interesting. Or, it could have been like about ancient Egypt or whatever you have you, where you can literally take all that stuff and you're like, oh, well, now I can take a sense of real stuff and put it in the game. where it creates that terror. Because, if you're playing a scenario of it's the 1930s and you're at the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago, which is 1 square mile, a museum that is 1 square mile. And you're down in the depths of that museum, and you just received that sarcophagus from ancient Egypt. Well, now you've given a premise, and it's still well, that's Call of Cthulhu. No, that's just how the game is being played.
Yeah.
It's the environment, the mechanic. Like, if you look at all these different role-playing games, what's the one thing that always changes? The mechanics. There are similarities to a lot of them, but they change the mechanics. Like, it's 2d20. It's a all 6-sided dice. Or it's, all percentile. When you take all that away and you just, okay, here's you could use this, and you can use it for any time period that you want to play. Now you're not changing the game mechanics, you're just changing your environment.
Gotcha.
One of the things we were talking about last night is how you have your D&D character sheet, and you've got your feats, and you've got your DC for this and DC for that, and you got your feats and your skills and all this other crap. Just eliminating all that. Your backstory is your and then it would be up to the DM. Would you be proficient in that because of your backstory? Okay, you work for the blacksmith, and so you're maintaining everybody's sword and stuff like that. Well, you would be proficient at it, so your DC would be this. Well, you've never seen a forge in your life, and you're trying to maintain your weapon. Well, your DC is going to be totally different.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
So instead of having all those charts and that big giant character sheet, you've got a backstory. And if the DM knows who or the narrator's probably a better thing because you're trying to tell the story. Your narrator looks at you and goes, "Okay, I know what your character sheet, your backstory is on your character sheet. Your DC is going to be 10 for this, so go ahead and roll." It simplifies the mechanics. It makes it go faster. You don't have to worry about it. Well, I got to look this up. It's like, okay, well, I already know. So your DC is going to be this because this is a simple task or whatever. I kind of got that from Twilight 2000. They had different proficiencies where, okay, this would be an advanced task, so your DC would be this. Well, if you're proficient in it, it lowers that DC to this. So it's the same type of thing, except you're doing it on the fly. You don't have to have a chart in front of you. And the narrator is the one in the end who has that decision. He knows about what your character is, and he knows what the task is. And you have to pretty much be, if you're the narrator, dungeon master, whatever, you have to be a subject matter expert in whatever genre you pick, whether it's a space game or you're playing Stranger Things or something, which is not everything kind of mainstream. But anyways, if you're playing medieval, or if you're playing whatever, you have to be a subject matter expert, whatever that is.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
So you have to know the history and everything because you're telling a story and you want it to be somewhat accurate. Even if it's your own creation of your own world, you have to be an expert in it. So, okay, well, I know what the DC is going to be for this because you're doing kind of a simple task. So, and you might not be proficient in picking that lock because you don't really know thieves' tools, but you've seen them used a couple times. So you're trying to fiddle with it. Well, your DC is going to be this, whether you make it or not. And so then that fighter who's trying to use the thieves' tools to get that lock open gets all torqued off because he can't do it, and he ends up smashing it with his warhammer.
Yeah, I mean that's a good example where if somebody's playing we haven't come up with names yet because for our classes per se, because they're not going to be classes. They're archetypes where when you make your character, you don't have an actual class. What you will have is an archetype that you can follow. Or you can follow part of an archetype of a fighter and part of an archetype of like what'll be a thief, and create your own, your swashbuckler Billy now. And that that's what we're leaning towards for creation of characters with the game.
Okay.
Where
or make your own up. Your character sheet is your class.
Yeah.
You know,
Which goes back to
and that's more adaptable for different scenarios for different types of games. You know, if you want to do the grimdark or whatever, you need, you know, well, you got a vampire hunter. Well, you just created the vampire hunter. What's his backstory? What traits does he have? You know, the history and everything. It's like, okay, well, then you know how to do this and this and this and this. But if you're playing a modern type of thing or a zombie game, well, you might be Joe Blow, the store clerk, and you know how to run a cash register and deal with people, so you're able to negotiate, but you might not be able to pick up a stick and beat the hell out of somebody with it.
In context.
Yeah. So I mean, but that same set of core rules covers all that because you're basing it off of what the character's backstory is.
Yeah, gotcha.
So there's not really any classes. It's okay, well, you know, because it's really, really hard to take a class type for like a medieval or Gothic setting and make it modern.
Oh yeah.
I mean, you can do it, but it takes some work because over time things have changed so much.
Yeah, you'd end up with something like GURPS where you have to have 6 million supplements and books and stuff like that.
Exactly. Right. So if your narrator or game master or whatever just looks at your character and says, okay, I know your backstory, I know what your employment was, what you know the whole 9 yards. I know what you're basically making a new person out and put it on paper. Mm-hmm. Their history, their employment, you know what they've done for work. You know, we came up with one. I came up with one the other night as an example. We're playing the Gothic Horror, and in that time frame, you had the Silk Road coming from China. I mean, it wasn't really super prevalent, but so I can make a character that's a former Mongol warrior who now is working for a band of merchants trying to get the wares to Europe, and he gets ambushed. They took all the wares, and now he's got to find a way to pay these guys back because they're sending people out there to try to get them because they haven't got their money. They haven't got the stuff in return, so he's now got to come up with this stuff to be able to go back home. Otherwise, he's going to get killed. Well, here's a guy who knows how to fight. He might be older and he might be rusty at it, so he might not be totally proficient anymore, but he knows how to negotiate because he's a merchant. You know, he's had to deal with people.
I get you.
So he's got his particular set of skills, and they're not listed out in with, you know, numbers and all that other stuff in detail. You might have them as bullet points, but you've got this backstory. You know what he is. You know who this guy is. And then on top of that, the narrator and game master can bring in elements of, you know, you got a hunting party after him because he hasn't come home in 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So they're looking for him. You know, and you can bring that into the game. It adds more story to the game, so you can have like let's say you get into a position where you haven't been able to prepare for the next game session. Well, I can bring this into the story as like a side story. So now they're having to deal with these guys coming around and trying to hunt them down. And now what's the party going to do? They're going to abandon the guy, or are they going to branch with him and try to, you know, get him out of there, or they're going to fight him or whatever. So that way you can prepare for the next gaming session because you were lazy last week.
Nice.
Yeah, it gives lots of elements. Go ahead, Karl.
No, I was going to ask a normal question. I think I already discussed this with Shawn last week. If you take jumping into the modern period, so we're talking about anything from 2010 onwards, how would you deal with technology in your game? Like, for example, if you look at mobile phones now, everyone has a camera, everyone has immediate access to information. If you have something funny happening, then everyone is going to know about it.
Then there's that element to it. Like we were talking last night, you have a modern game, and you might have, and it's the zombie apocalypse or whatever, or it's slightly, if it's a cyberpunk type of thing, and we're slightly futuristic, and you've got your criminal over here because the world's in chaos. You got the criminal over here, a guy playing a criminal, career criminal, but he's got somewhat of a moral code, and then you have your police officer over here. Well, a police officer or any general person, maybe you've seen the news reports, knows who this guy is. Well, they might have a little bit of animosity because they come from two different backgrounds, but the police officer knows this guy's at least got a little bit of sense of honor to him. So he's somewhat trustworthy. And he has to depend on him to survive, which creates a little bit of character conflict. But at the same time, he knows he can depend on this guy. And the criminal may have run into this guy a couple of times and said, okay, at least he was an honest police officer. He wasn't dirty. So, he's going to treat me fairly at least. And now they have to work together to be able to, play the game. You could have that sort of thing going on, but with social media and everything, you could have a third character who just likes to read the news and said, hey, I know you're the guy that did that. And the whole gossip tree and everything like that. You can add that into this. It's really up to the whoever the narrator is, how far they want to take that.
Yeah, I can imagine
in a modern game.
Yeah, it's like I think we were talking specifically about Vampire the Masquerade last time, and it's like playing a game set in the 90s is easy because you're not supposed to let humans know you're a vampire. But as soon as all the humans have cameras and stuff, it's like it's a lot trickier. I think it was I'm not sure if it was Shawn or Lisa who suggested this, but basically it would have. Yeah, okay, the vampires are sponsoring deepfake technology, so no one knows what's real or not.
An earlier time frame game. Yeah, like you say, you're playing in the 90s. Well, they were cell phones then, but they weren't common. And you didn't really have social media. You had email and stuff like that, but you just have the newspaper and maybe if the internet was in infancy, you had some news out there. But your character wouldn't know that. Yeah, that's where you got to instruct your players. Hey, you have to think in that time frame. Your character's not going to know this. It's metagaming. What we call metagaming.
Yep.
If and I used to punish that heavily in my games. Your character wouldn't know that. Well, no, but blah 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 blah. No, your character wouldn't know that. Blah 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 blah. Okay, you can go ahead and do that and see what happens. And then I kill the character off, and they end up having to roll a new character. So,
I think that when you do stuff like that, though, you have to explain why you did that to them, so they understand, so they don't get mad. Like, dude, you weren't playing. You're not playing a 1930s gangster. You're playing with all the knowledge you have. You know what I mean? It's kind of like one of those type of deals where you have to look at things in balance.
Unless you want that player to leave because they've done it like 6 times.
Yeah. I mean, or you can just ask them to leave politely. Like, hey, this isn't working out for us.
I like the drama in the game. It was kind of the other characters, the other players kind of liked it. I like what he did. The guy didn't like what he was doing either. You should have said something. I kicked him a long time ago.
Okay. Other question: How do you work with misinformation in your games? Like, for example, if you look at Bram Stoker's Dracula, there's this set of superstitions about vampires that this is true, this is not true, this is partially true. So in Dracula, you have Van Helsing coming along and saying, "No, that is bullshit." But unless the players have that kind of mentor, how do you A, sneak in the information, and B, get them to figure out what's wrong, what's true and what's not? Because I mean, if they're working on false or wrong information, then I could see a lot of characters being rolled up a lot of times.
Okay, prime example. You can have a rumor within the game, build a chart of rumors, and one of the rumors is that vampires sparkle and they're nice. And you can, you can befriend them, and they still drink blood, but you may not be on their list comparative to what your depiction of the vampire is. Um, you could do that. You can utilize that, or the vampires in your game could sparkle. I mean, it's all invariant of the person, but you could utilize giving, having a bulletin board where the player characters, see like, oh, somebody's got a reward for if we go find this, withered hand. Well, the withered hand is Edgar Allan Poe's The Monkey's Paw,
Okay.
where you don't know why this person wants it, but you don't know it's the idea of the monkey's paw. So now you get the item, and one person says something and it comes true, but then there's a dark side to it.
Oh crap.
But they haven't made they've left the ancient castle where they down in the bowels of this castle or this crypt where they've achieved getting it, but on their way back to their town, they have an experience. So not only do you have getting there and doing all this stuff down inside, now you've extended it to where, oh, they have to get back. But when they get back, or they don't have an experience, they get back, they give it to the person, and the next time you play, that person has done something, and now things aren't right. The
Alright.
dead should not be walking, because what's one of the things about them, you don't bring people back from the dead. That's been that's in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Um, it's a common thing throughout human history, as well as the taboos of cannibalism. Most of the time when we look at it today, that's extreme survival situations, but there was association with it of you don't do this because of
Yeah, for
the
sure.
prions that are involved, and those type of things where you can utilize that stuff in your gameplay. Right? I mean, you want to really mess with people. Zombies are because of the a prion that got into somebody and they died from it, which is what you get from eating human flesh. You can develop prions in your brain, and it messes things up. So where they died with that, but that's an external organism that brings them back to life. Now your zombies are undead. Well, they bite somebody, they transmitted that prion. Well, if they just got bit on their arm, it's going to take longer for those prions to take effect versus somebody who got bit on their neck. And they died within a few minutes versus over having this nasty infection that's slowly killing them.
Okay.
There's your zombie apocalypse.
Okay. So basically, as long as you have a consistent idea of how things work in your world, then you can create misinformation based off of on that, and it still stays consistent. Yeah, okay,
Yes.
that makes a lot of sense.
But where that
If it's your world, it's your world, and if it doesn't relate exactly to some novel that somebody read, well, this is my world. This isn't that novel. So this is the way it is. You've already set the stage. You've already told them the backstory of the world, and that you've created, and the time frame and the rules, and because you got to do that in the first couple of gaming sessions. Well, hey, this is what the world looks like. This is what we're playing. This is the Gothic Horror. It's not, I'm not going to do it exactly like Bram Stoker, but it's going to be similar. It's going to have these elements of it, but it's going to be different.
Yeah, I mean,
So now
it doesn't have to be the same. It's not. There's not nowhere that says it has to be like that.
Exactly. It's the narrator's creation. It's the game master's creation. And it's the players are just actors in your world. It's your world. You've created it. Everybody else is actors. They can't tell you how you're supposed to create your world.
Yeah. Okay, quick aside here. We have a comment from Lawrence Davies. Hi, Lawrence, by the way. The Count from Sesame Street is a better vampire than any of the ones from Twilight.
Um, some of the character development for Twilight was okay. I say that loosely. The Count was very, ah, 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 ah. So take it from there. I humbly agree. I thought it was a cool idea that vampires were a little different for the Twilight series. That's cool, but not into the sparkliness. Vampires are supposed to burst into flames, according to legend. So, and other modern pop culture from dating back to the 1890s, um, vampires burst into flames. So, take it for what you want.
I was never really big into Twilight. I think I watched for first 15 minutes. That was it. I was like, I can't handle this.
Yeah.
I don't have a frame of reference for that.
Don't worry, it won't hurt your head.
Twilight was one of the one of the few books that I dropped within a few pages because it's really badly written, in my opinion. So yeah, it's like I didn't even get to the sparkliness. I just what the hell is this?
You know,
Yeah.
there are some things that people need to like when you run games and stuff. Take the time out to learn different games. Um, one of the people that I admire because of the way that they run their channel for YouTube is they talk about Dan Masters with Dungeon Craft.
Yeah.
He talks about other games, and he's like, "Well, I like this one, so I'm going to use this, and I like this, and I'm going to use that." Well, a lot of us have been doing that. He's just the first one to say, like, "Okay, well, here it is. This
Yeah.
is my world." Well, you could do the same thing. I mean, you got DM Scotty with his Easy D6, where he created his world of using six-sided dice for all your actions. But if you look at the way he developed his characters in Easy way, how you develop your character in Easy D6, it's really just what you think. Like, here is your outline of your character, what they can do. Now it's up to you to fill in all the blanks. Um, with Dan Masters has Deathbringer, which is a really cool game if you want to stick to more towards the D&D mechanics for people that like that stuff. Where you can utilize that, and like with what we're developing with Reflections of the Shadow is using the D&D mechanics, but also using the the basis of having your ability to, well, here's your template for a fighter, here's your template for a thief, here's your template for a magic user, here's your template for this, that, and the other. Where, okay, well, I want to play a vampire hunter. Well, vampire hunters can fight, so they get this, and this, and my guy's going to be able to pick locks and stuff because he, having to go into the wherever the vampires are, so he can do this, and this. And now you have a vampire hunter,
Okay, I
and it's
gotcha.
your creation, but you use these um, archetypes to create your character, where you can use that same archetype, even though it's a fighter type archetype, and then you have a ranger archetype of from like Dungeons and Dragons. Well, you can take that with the thief and the ranger, and now you've got a modern day. If you're playing a post-apocalyptic game where your character's background is they were a soldier, well, you've taken those three archetypes and combined them, taken elements from them to make your character.
I got you.
So not only could you make a vampire hunter in the Victorian era, you can make a futuristic zombie apocalypse character. And all it is you're using the archetypes of, oh, I want this from this, and I want this from this and this. But one of the things that with Reflection of the Shadow is very like magic is non-existent in the context of like Dungeons and Dragons, because this, we've all seen the Inquisitions throughout history. They accuse someone of doing something. Take, for instance, the Salem witch trials. A lot of that boils down to they were going after people that had land.
Yep.
Unfortunately, that's what it boiled down to. Now you take that type of environmental element where there's this cruel corruption that's going on, but that one person that they actually got that might have been able to do something really nefarious, like talk to the dead or whatever. Now they unleash that power and it gets soaked into the land. So now instead of it just being that one person, now it's that house that normal everyday people can see ghosts in. Where you do things like that, where now it's a haunted place. So it could be an ancient crypt, or it could be the house down the street because you're playing in, a modern D20 style game in 2022.
Uh-huh.
And, you're having a Halloween party and everybody gets together and, everybody's having fun. And, even as adults, like, I dare you to go to that creepy house. You know how people get,
Yep.
So now, okay, well, you're coming with me. I'm not doing it by myself. Well, Billy and Susie and, Stephanie all go over to that house. Well, they've been gone for 45 minutes. So the rest of the group now is like, well, what are they doing? What are they okay? But within that 45-minute time period, you heard what sounded like a scream and a bunch of dogs barking. So now you've given them enticement to go. But they may say, no, we're just going to hang out and party and do whatever. Well, now, now you've created that. Well, they can still go do that and go look for these people. But, they're like, oh, whatever. They've only been gone for 45 minutes. But the next day when they still haven't shown back up, now what you've done is you've presented the playing characters with a sense of guilt for not going and looking for their friends.
Yep.
So with those type of mechanics where it allows somebody to do stuff like that without having to worry about, well, the people that memorize all the rules. Well, you can't do that because in this book it says that you can't, but then it becomes a conflict of, well, this is what the rules say here, or this is what the rules say here. That's not the most up-to-date version of the rules. Well, what we've come up with how we're structuring everything, the rules are, this is how you make your character, and this is your archetypes that you can draw for your inspiration for your character. But when it comes to the DM side or the GM or the narrator side of the story, it's their ball game. But people have to remember that the way somebody perceives what is written, like my depiction of what magic missile is versus what it says in the text and from the official game rules may be different because of how I interpreted what I read.
Makes sense.
So now
that and past history, and because back in our time, magic missile might have been different.
Mm-hmm.
We first started playing, so we always see the magic missile as that, and now you have the modern version of it. And it's like, what the hell is this?
Yeah.
Yeah, that also makes sense.
Well, like back in the day, you used to have to roll for magic to work. So instead of having that person make multiple rolls, you combined if they want to use magic, say we'll use magic missile for instance. They're going to use magic missile to defend themselves from this creature. Well, or attack the creature. Instead of making them roll to see if they could cast, making them roll to see if they can hit the creature, and then rolling for damage, you can literally take and go, okay, for them to have the spell work properly, they have to get 12 or higher. Okay, so they add their intelligence modifier to their roll, and that's it. It's not, oh, well, they're +5 for Arcana or this or that. No, it's just based off their intelligence. So it simplifies it.
You're proficient in that because you've been doing it for forever. So your DC is this, then you add your intelligence modifier and then go with it.
Same as literally everything else.
Yes.
All right, yeah, that makes sense.
So that it makes it to where, but here's the drawback to it within the world that we're creating for the Gothic Horror setting, which is the main. It'll have the player's handbook and DM's stuff all within one book. Magic is not prevalent.
It's kind of low-key kind of thing, yeah.
Well, Karl, I'm going to ask you a question.
Sure.
I mean, this is your show. It's 2022, and you're walking down the street, and all of a sudden you see a dude throw a lightning bolt or have electricity coming out where you can actually physically see it, and it's jumping across the road at something. How would you react to that?
My first action would probably be to literally assume that I've gone nuts, or I'm seeing things, or I didn't get enough sleep, or I was drunk, or something like that.
Okay. So you would try to have a realization of that can't be real.
Yeah, pretty much.
Now, picture
So that's one hell of a taser.
Yeah. Now picture yourself back in, the Middle Ages, and you see somebody do that. But it's been pounded into your head that people who can do extra-worldly things.
Burn the witch!
Exactly. But even in today's society, I mean, we've seen it happen where people panic, and you have what happened in the 1980s with the Satanic Panic, going full circle with what we were talking about last time.
Yeah, I got you.
Or earlier, it shows that, well, if somebody who is potential, has all these different ideologies, sees that, your thing is you're trying to rationalize it in your head, but their rationalization comes to the conclusion of that was a witch.
I get you. Okay. Yeah.
So it allows you to build story arcs off of it.
Nice.
What we're trying to do with the rules is make us. I don't know if you remember from the mid '90s, the GURP system, where they had one general. It was a general purpose rules or whatever, general universal rules for role playing, GURPS. And they had one core set of rules that's like 500 pages or something like that. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I remember it was a thick slab of a book. Yeah.
And then you had to pay like $50 for it, and then you had to buy a module for modern, and you had to buy a module for medieval, and then you had to buy a module for futuristic, and next thing you know, you're $500 into a game system. What we're trying to do is simplify something like that, where you have one core set of rules, and then we might put out a module that gives your archetypes for like Star Wars type of scenario, or Star Trek, whatever futuristic scenario. Or you might have obviously the Gothic Horror one's going to be the first type of system, where you have your archetypes for that type of setting, the Victorian setting.
I get you.
That's what we're basing it on. But these rules, these core set of rules, can be applied to anything you want to. And you might have to make the archetype if you want to get to it before we get to it. But you have the basis there to go, okay, well, this is the simple mechanics behind it. You got your advanced mechanics behind it. You can combine them however you want to do it. If you want a fast-paced game, you can use the simple mechanics where it's more storytelling, but it's fast-paced. But if you've got all these guys that are technical and want to roll dice a lot, because that's what they're into, you can do the technical side of it, the advanced side of it.
Nice.
And, so it's all combined into one. And you can do a mixture there if you want to, simple mechanics for the role playing. But when you're fighting, if you want to make it extreme detail and you want to roll and see where you hit and all that other stuff and what kind of damage you do and everything. And we were even thinking about simplifying that as this class of weapons does this much damage. Whether, you're using a pistol or a hand crossbow or a short bow, it's going to be the same damage.
Yep.
All across the board. Because it's this type of weapon, so and it's a ranged weapon, so then it's a short range weapon. So why don't you make all the mechanics the same for it, the damage the same for it? Just adapt your creatures to the damage.
Yeah. I mean, certainly makes things more straightforward.
Oh yeah, especially if, okay, some people have no problems using swords and shields and crossbows and all that stuff. Some people don't like guns, so they don't have to use them. But having the mechanics there where it's okay, your basics are, a light crossbow does 1d6. A flintlock musket, a pistol does 1d6. What do they call that? The single action army, from the late 1800s, does 1d6.
It's all in the same ballpark.
It's all the same. Now, where that may change is, a rifle musket does this 1d8. Now, if you have
but just so does a longbow or a heavy crossbow.
Yeah. But as well, now, if you have a Kentucky long rifle, which is still a flintlock musket, it was better quality. Now, it still does 1d8, but because it's a better quality weapon, you get a +1 to your attack roll, not your damage, because the damage doesn't
range
change.
to it too. Yeah.
Okay.
But the damage does not change. It still does 1d8. It's just because it's a fine crafted weapon, it does +1.
So it's going to hit that little more often.
Right. Now, people are like, well, what about magic weapons? Well, any type of, you can look at Excalibur. Excalibur was a cool magic sword, but it was also a curse.
Only one. Oh wait, that was something different. That was Highlander.
Yeah.
Why was it the curse? Remind me.
Okay, well, look at the story of Excalibur with King Arthur. Everything was great, but people wanted the sword because it was a representation of power. So,
okay.
how it weighed on King Arthur's head, having this sword that can do all these cool things, but inevitably, somebody was going to come and take the sword.
I got it.
Because that was how, it's the same thing. Well, if the Johnsons have it, I have to have it. Well, it kind of goes into
the Voldemort's wand. Everybody wanted that wand. There could only be one wielder. It only would respond to one person. That's whoever killed the person who wielded it before.
So when you combine those type of elements into the structure of what we're doing, it is allowing us to expand where we could play any time frame environment, and you don't have to have 50 million books.
Yeah, I definitely like that.
where you have, okay, here's the basic core stuff here, but where's the monster manual? Well, if you have a Dungeons and Dragons monster manual, you can take the monsters from that. Or if you have whatever game system monsters you have, well, I could take those and, okay, well, hit points, okay, you don't add the Constitution modifier to it, so it's this.
I mean, and if you don't
Okay.
have another system one, well then just make them up.
Yeah, you can make them up. They have, okay, so vampires are strong, so, and they're going to be a lot stronger than my player characters, and my player characters, only have a Constitution bonus added to their hit dice until they reach 5th level. After 5th level, it's just the hit dice. Well, a vampire is going to be stronger, so if they have 25 hit points, my vampire is going to have 85 because now they're superhuman. Because vampires, according to folklore that we, as well as popular cultural mix today, vampires don't die easy. It goes the same for a werewolf. Everyone's like, oh, we gotta have to have a pack of werewolves. Having one single solitary werewolf and them not knowing who it is far scarier than having a pack of werewolves. Or in your case of what one of the games I DM'd with you in it, Karl, what did I do? You guys had learned about the town through the the slip in time where you guys were experiencing the town before where it was, but you come to find out all you were interacting with was the remnants of the ghosts that were trapped there. So you found out in the long run that everything that happened led up to the point of that one person being a werewolf and slaughtering the whole town. So
That
it's,
was a good setup.
yeah, it allows for that type of action to occur where the rules aren't bogging it down. Because sometimes you have guys, the narrators, where you get off work, you're burnt out, you did minimal preparation for your game, and everything's just kind of bogged down for that night. But the next time you play, it's all high tempo, fast paced. It allows you to have that where if you have a real life and you can't do everything, where with just a few simple roll of the dice and going, oh hey, I'm gonna utilize a book called the Dreaded Thingonomicon. I think it's a great book because it's 500, almost 500 pages of, okay, it's winter, okay, there's a blizzard, roll a d20 and pick XYZ PDQs happening, and now you have your environment and you're done in 2 minutes.
I got you.
Because, like, okay, it's doing this, and if the player characters are exposed too long, they get 1d6 points of damage to exposure, and you move on. Adding elements like that into being able to utilize those. Do you have to have that book? No, you can make them up. And that wouldn't be hard. It'd be, you're a conquistador dredging through the swamps in the Amazon, and you're getting trench foot, or you're, climbing a mountain somewhere, you're freezing to death.
You're getting frostbite and stuff, yeah.
Yeah.
All the good stuff. Okay, gents, we're going to look at the community showcase in a second, so we can see what everyone else has been up to. I have one question for you before we do that. When do you think we can see Reflections of Shadow in print?
We should have a rough draft by January.
Nice.
That's what we're shooting for. Once we get that rough draft, we will be taking players to play, other than our small group that we have where we've been testing everything, to expand from that to see what people like and what people don't like. And okay, well, basically by consensus, like, okay, some people don't like this, but a lot of people like that too, we're going to leave it in. But if everyone's like, if the major consensus says, well, no, we don't really like that, well, then maybe we'll take that out. And that's why Norm was talking about having the basic and advanced, where we could still have those rules, but it also allows you to not utilize them if you choose not to. See, that's the thing, is that we're not trying to sell 50 million books that revolve around one particular book. It's here's the basis, and you want an adaptation with some more rules because your players like to do this. Well, here's this, and we're trying to make it as cheap as possible. You know, if we can get away with having a player's handbook DM's guide mashed together and you can buy it for $20. I mean, $20 is a lot for a kid, even to some adults. So now, if that's all you need, then that's all you need.
Nice. I'm definitely looking forward to it, and I hope you will join me again once you have it in some kind of stable version or even a beta, because I think that would be great to discuss.
Oh, not a problem. I'm sure we'd be more than glad to come back, and let's go on to the community showcase real quick and
Okay,
go from there.
off we go then. Okay, 1 second. Let me just turn on the virtual camera for you guys. Oh. Okay, so we've got a few entries this time. Okay, first up is Earthman Brick's Gargant. I think he's been working on this.
That thing is cool. I liked watching him build that.
Oh yeah, I really like the part that it's made in parts, so he can disassemble it and use it as buildings or tanks or whatever.
That's the versatility to it's awesome.
The thing is that this photo doesn't show the scale of it,
Oh no, it's huge.
because a 28mm figure would be somewhere around the size of the little cannon thingy it's got in here. Even lower than that, maybe.
Yeah.
A little pillbox.
Say again?
Yeah.
It's
It's like a little pillbox.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
I think his video came out for this came up last week, so I think it's already on his channel.
Yep, I believe that's what he said.
Okay, 1 sec. Trying to zoom out of this, but Discord is not cooperating. Ah, there we go. Okay, yeah, this is this gate thingy is parts from the same build, just disassembled. So yes, Steve, that is a seriously epic build.
Yes.
Okay, Cross from Campaign Terrain. This half timber house he's been building.
Yeah, I liked watching Cross build this. That was really cool.
That's a lot of detail.
Oh yeah.
I mean, let me kind of zoom in on that.
It's very. It looks like row houses would have back in the Middle Ages, because it's property taxes. You know, everybody built everything bigger up top because they had to pay for that little piece of land.
Yep. Just the ground area. Yeah? So that's why I get the overhangs and stuff.
I like how you did the cedar cake roof on it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's good detail.
Okay, and if anyone is not familiar with Cross from Campaign Terrain, these bases that it's sitting on are one of my favorite ideas of his. It's basically a container, so they open up and you can store stuff in them.
Yeah, keep all your wall tiles in it.
Yep.
That's pretty cool.
So let's see, another piece from Cross.
Yeah.
Ah, this turned out real good.
Yes. I really I enjoyed watching him make this one too. You know, it was cool, you know, tossing around ideas where, you know, to help him progress it farther. Or,
Yeah,
you know, he's like, well, this is my idea. What do you think? You know, just because he was doing it with all of us, like he, you know, like we all, if everyone doesn't understand what we're talking about, on Dungeon Matron's channel, we do live crafting every Wednesday and every other Saturday, and have where people can come just ask us questions about, well, why are you doing it this way, or why are you doing it that way, or hey, what do you guys think of this? We're nurturing our own community instead of using external components to do it.
yes.
Um,
Or even if you just want to
Mhm.
come in, hang out, and talk about movies or TV shows, then it's always a good place.
Yeah, or other role playing games or mechanics or whatever discussion topic you want to discuss. Everybody usually joins in and gives their feedback.
Okay. Oh,
Oh, Lawrence has got some stuff here.
yeah, Lawrence has got a lot of stuff. I think this is part of his mega dungeon complex.
Oh God, yes.
I still want
That's
to
like
see
the,
that laid out on a garage floor, I guess, because it's not going to sit on a table.
yeah. I think that's the bane of his existence right now, but he likes doing it. So yeah, that's a pretty cool
And
stair system.
stackers, I mean, he can just. I think he even used them to build some complete blocks here.
Yeah, and just flip one upside down
Yep,
and
and
just
you've
lay
got,
it on top.
and you've got a pillar or a base or something. Yep, it's really
Yeah,
neat.
that's really cool. I like Lawrence's stuff. He does some really cool
Oh
stuff.
yeah, no kidding. Ah, okay, more of his mega dungeon.
Yes. Oh, floor tiles. Yay.
Ooh, that's some nice detail in there.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, you can see the cobbles. That's like cobblestone. I like that. That's way more patience than I have to do all that.
I'm not sure if he used a roller or did them by hand, but I'm hoping roller, but I wouldn't
If
put
you
it
did
Well,
past
it
him.
by hand, well,
I'm looking at the detail inside each square. There, you can see the cobbles like they're cobblestone.
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
That's incredible.
yeah, definitely is.
And he didn't use a. I mean, there might be styrofoam and just the little bubbles coming out, but the way he shaded it, it looks like real cobblestone. That's
I,
like I
I,
said, that's more, and they're all different. It's not like it's a cookie cutter doing it. That's
yeah,
way more
yeah,
patience
true.
than I
Yeah,
have.
so it probably is done by hand. Jeez. Yeah, Lawrence definitely does have more patience than me. Ooh, some of Mia's work. I love these.
I like what they do with the stacked stone. That looks nice.
Oh, it is.
It looks like real stacked stone stuff that they would do for like a little temple.
I like
These are
Mia's stuff.
good.
Very modular.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Mia is
that's
also a great crafter. Yeah.
Oh yeah, most definitely. And what's really cool is like with their crafters meetup that we do, it you know, I'm sure there's some people that come to it and they're intimidated because of what they see us, all of us being able to do, but we all started out in the same place. You know, it's just experience and time of what we learned.
Oh yeah, 100%.
And Mia rocks it. I can't wait to see the zombies that she has when they're done because she was showing some of the miniatures she's working on.
Yeah, I think I saw part of the terrain she's building for the zombies, and it's looking really good. Okay, I think these are the bear stones.
Hmm.
Lovely coloring on them. Nice ultimate dungeon terrain.
Yes, that is. I like that UDT. That's really nice. Who posted that
like
one
I
up?
said again. You can see all the cobbles and the cobblestone. That's
And
the detail that
these are
the
definitely
detail
done by
that
hand.
the
Yeah.
stone.
Yeah,
Wow,
I like the
that's
gaming
amazing.
table too.
Say again?
Yeah,
The gaming table that's sitting in.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I like that.
I can build you
So
one,
everyone can look down at it a little bit and not be too.
and
That's
it's
nice.
contained if you spill it because people are clumsy.
Yeah,
Yep.
definitely. Okay, more from Earthman Brick. It's kind of a orc cyborg.
Yeah, I was gonna say the futuristic orc. That's pretty cool. From the futuristic minotaur.
Yeah, the thing on his back. Yeah, whatever it is. Looks like a kind of sign on his back.
Is that clothes hanging off the horns on that?
Say again?
Or those banners? I was wondering if it's clothing from the picture. It looks like clothing, or if it's
I think it's some.
banners.
I think they're small glyphs or banners or something like that. But yeah, I can see how they would look like a pair of shorts or something.
But that's the cool thing. Like it's like, oh, for one group of people, it could be, guy walks up, he's not a bad person, and he's got, clothes hanging from it. The other one's, for a war band. So I like the versatility in that. That is cool.
Then it makes you look twice.
Hmm.
Right?
And I like the.
Whoa, what is that? Yeah.
I like the grunge on it as well. It's kind of
Oh, yeah.
commenting with Steve. Okay, one more shot of the. Okay. Here we have a 28mm miniature for scale.
Oh, wow.
I think the
I didn't-
monstrosity.
Yep.
Yes.
I think that was one of the reasons he made it in pieces because he couldn't justify making one model that took up this much space. So
Yeah.
like this, he can use it, in pieces or whatever. But again,
Easy storage.
yep. Okay, coming up, Stefano from Chimera War Gaming.
Yeah. I like Stefano's stuff. He's phenomenal. I mean, everybody that is in my book, everybody's great. I love everybody's stuff, but I like his grim dark style.
I mean,
Just some of the stuff he comes up with.
it takes a lot of work to make something look this disgusting. It's so great job,
Tastes
Stefano.
like chicken though.
Say again.
Tastes like chicken though.
Okay. Ooh, some nicely weathered coffins.
Oh yeah, those are nice.
Yeah, check out the textures.
That's a good medieval style coffin, yeah. The Victorian medieval era.
Okay, and this is a bell tower, printed and painted. Not sure which is which one, but yeah, it's also looking really good. Nice.
Yeah, that's really nice.
Yeah.
Oh, different shot of the of Mia's dungeon terrain. It's the same one we saw earlier.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah,
That's nice.
It's got a glass overlay. It is a great table.
Yeah. You know what that would be great for? Like have a coffee table like that where you could just like sit in the living room. Yeah, where everyone can sit comfortably. They're sitting on the couch or on the floor, or beanbag chair, whatever, and it's right there. It's the right height.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Just take off the cover and off you go.
Yep. Or you just leave the cover on and have the little scenes set up on the inside, and
yeah,
now you don't have to worry about anybody touching anything.
Oh, I think this is some kind of ice terrain. Ah.
Oh, that's cool.
It's a great
I
idea.
like how it's modular, how it leads up to the town. I wonder if the buildings are all modular as well.
I would imagine so. But
That
yeah,
is really
this is
cool.
a great idea.
Yeah, they are kind of modular. They're not set in there. You got the buildings off to the side that aren't even placed yet.
So Mia just responded in the chat that saying that it is her coffee table.
Nice.
And Stefano was saying that he used texture paints for the water well. Cool.
That turned out really good.
Yes.
I will probably be stealing this idea at some point.
Yeah, I like
It's
that.
really good. I think that's all we have for today, and that was some great work.
Oh, most definitely.
More talent than I've got, I swear.
Say again?
More talent than I've got.
Well, with Norm, with your background, Norm could actually build a modern house with his architectural background, and it's crazy. It's
So,
like, dude, if you can do that, then you could build a medieval house.
so Norm is also an architect? Did I hear that right?
My dad was an architectural engineer. When I was a kid, he used to make me do a lot of his drafting and stuff, and do his architectural models.
Okay.
And yeah, but the problem is at that young age, I didn't really want to do that. I just wanted to go out and play. I was like 10 years old, and I'm doing these architectural models, and so it kind of translates to modern day. I really don't want to do that.
Okay. Shawn, Norm, we're going to wrap up soon, so thank you so much for being with us today. It's been a pleasure talking to you guys, and I hope you'll be back soon with when the Reflections of Shadow is closer to completion. So definitely looking forward to playing that.
Oh
Okay.
yes, most definitely. And thank you for having us on and giving us the ability to talk a little bit about it and talk about Gothic horror and the relevance to the duality of man as well as multiple other things that we discussed.
Yeah, it's always a pleasure talking about it, and talked about it a lot in the hangouts as well. It's just I think it was nice to have this discussion with everyone on pretty much Halloween, so it's right on season.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, check us out on every Wednesday and every other Saturday on Dungeon Matrons Discord, and I think you guys will have a lot of fun. Just because we talk about everything,
Literally everything.
literally everything. But there's one rule. One rule is you can agree to disagree with somebody, but don't lash out at them.
Yep.
Simple as that. Because that's
Matter of respect.
yeah, it's about respect.
Be a civilized human, and you'll be fine.
Yes.
But yeah,
Except
I'll drop a link to Dungeon
crossfire,
Matron's Discord channel on the in the comments after the stream.
oh, most definitely.
Okay, so guys, once again, thank you so much. The stream will be back tomorrow with Max the Uncrafting. But once again, thanks Shawn and thanks Norm and thanks everyone for watching. Goodbye.
Bye.
Right.